afternoon. My name is Dakota Hufford. I'm the Communications and Program Coordinator for CRBC and an entomologist. And I am joined by Amy Barton, our Communications and Stewardship Manager. Thank you for being here today. This is our sixth of seven webinars in our series designed to help you be a better steward of your land here in the Clackamas Basin.
And then we have a land acknowledgement for you. Many of us are joining from Oregon and Washington, and I'd like to take a moment to recognize that we are gathered on the unceded land of many Native peoples. We ask you to please join us in acknowledging the many communities, their leaders, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. We thank those who came before us for their stewardship of these lands and waters, and those who continue to steward them now and into the future.
All right, quickly, our schedule is just going to be a brief CRBC intro. We're going to talk about what beneficial insects are. We'll get some specific beneficial insects of the Clackamas Basin, and then we will talk about methods of attracting them to your yard. And then we will have some time for Q&A at the end. And so our goals for today are that we hope you can take away some new or reviewed information on beneficial insects, become familiar or more familiar with some Clackamas Basin specific beneficials. We hope that you can leave with several methods for attracting beneficial insects to your space. And we want to spread a general excitement for bugs, and we will be sharing a list of resources as well. And we really want to hear from you. But to conserve time, we just ask that you hold your questions to the end or pop them into the chat, and then we will address them at the end. And just remember that we are recording.
All right, here at the Clackamas River Basin Council, our mission is to foster partnerships for clean water, to improve fish and wildlife habitat, and enhance the quality of life for those who live, work, and recreate within the Clackamas River Basin. We are a 501c3 nonprofit watershed council, and for the past well over 20 years, we've been invested in restoring and protecting the Clackamas River and its tributaries. We do this through in-stream and riparian restoration projects. The photo on the left shows CRBC contractors installing large wood in a stream for fish habitat. We also host volunteer events and educational workshops, such as this, all free to the public. The image in the middle shows our Down the River cleanup, where volunteers help us clean a 22-mile stretch of the Clackamas River. We also offer streamside residents with free weed removal and native tree and shrub plantings through our Shade Our Streams program, and we help residents with wildfire recovery. The image on the right shows a freshly planted baby tree after the 2020 wildfires. And all of our work is aimed at improving the Clackamas River and its tributaries, but we can't do this great work without people like you. All right, so let's dig in. First, we're going to start with, what is a beneficial insect?
So the vast majority of insects that we see are not pests, and it is really just a few select species that disrupt our desirable plants, which we consider pesty or bad. So therefore, really, most bugs you see would be considered beneficials. The technical definition of a beneficial insect is broad, being it is any number of species of insect that perform valued services. These services range from pollination to composition to predation. The entire concept of beneficials, however, is subjective relative to our own human focus and experience, with our goals and desired outcomes changing per activity, thus changing the species that fills the role of a pest in certain settings. Beneficial insects are labeled such due to the nature of their life cycles, while pests are labeled such for the exact same reason. A pest is just the wrong organism in the wrong place at the wrong time, and may in fact, and definitely probably is, beneficial in another environment. So in general, there are 4 categories that beneficial insects can fall into: pollinators, predators, parasitoids, and detritivores. So let's look further into those 4 categories. So pollinators, although we most commonly think of bees as being primarily responsible for pollination, there are many different types of pollinators, including wasps, flies, beetles, moths and butterflies, and even midges and flower thrips. Pollination is, of course, the movement of pollen from the male part of the flower, the anther, to the female part, the stigma. And some insects are just more effective than others at pollinating because of structural adaptations to their physiology. So for example, honeybees have something called a corbicula, which is also called pollen baskets, and they are two hairy comb-like structures at the base of their hind legs, and they just are very good at collecting pollen. However, again, we don't just rely on bees for pollination. There are a plethora of other intricate and complex pollination relationships and methods, like passive pollination or specific adaptations to attract species, such as the phenomenon of flowers releasing pheromones that mimic sex hormones in wasps, and that leads the wasp to try and mate with the flower, which is then it's passively but intentionally pollinated by this action.
Okay, I'll see you Monday.
All right.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
A study from 2016 found that non-bee pollinators, although these bugs are not equipped with the same structures that aid others in pollination, they actually made more frequent stops to flowers during the daytime, and they accounted for almost 40% of all flower stops, which helped outweigh their structurally less effective pollination methods. The main pollinator takeaways are that they come in all shapes, sizes, and species, and some pollinators may also be predators, parasitoids, or detritivores. They can fill multiple roles. And pollination is just one of the many invaluable ecosystem services that is provided by insects. And then we have predators. Predatory insects eat large numbers of other insects throughout their lifetime and are an important element of natural pest control in our yards and gardens. They are free living and are usually as big or bigger than their prey. They can be generalists, feeding on a wide variety of prey, or specialists feeding on only one or a few closely related species. Some are predaceous as both adults and their immature forms. Some are predaceous only in one form or the other, and they can be transient or residential in the environment. And the method of predation varies widely among species. For example, some insects lie in wait for their prey, like a praying mantis, while others are active hunters, like the devil's coach horse beetle there in the picture. Predators are usually categorized and can be ID'd based on their feeding mechanisms. Those with chewing mouth parts, which simply chew up and swallow their victims. That includes things like ladybugs, ground beetles, praying mantis, and then those with piercing, sucking mouth parts, which stick a stylus mouth part into the prey's body and suck out the body contents. These predators often have powerful toxins and digestive enzymes that help immobilize their prey. This includes things like assassin bugs, lacewing larvae, and other tree bugs like box elders, things like that. Many predators are also able to supplement their diet by feeding on alternative food sources such as nectar, pollen, and fungi, and they are often voracious feeders and are generally more abundant than parasitoids. This category of insects contains beetles, tree bugs, things like stink bugs and box elders, green lacewings, hoverflies in their larval stage, who are also pollinators as adults, mantids, snakeflies, earwigs, and several other obscure ones. And then just a fun little fact, as early as 9th century China, farmers were modifying their orchards to aid in the transfer of predator ants that help control like a specific type of aphid. So by 18th century, they were, people recognized insects as biocontrol. And then we have parasitoids, which are my personal favorites. Parasitoids are insects that live on or in a host insect, and they feed on the host, and they usually almost always kill it in the process. Most parasitoids are small, stingless wasps or flies that lay their eggs on the hosts. They're usually very small and not easily seen, but research has showed that they are incredibly important on species considered pests, insect. They take down pest populations quickly. For instance, parasitic wasps are known to control things like whiteflies, aphids, scales, coddling moths, and cutworms. The first parasitoids documented were the ichneumons. There's a picture of one there. and they were first described in the 1700s. Adults will, and this is common for the majority of the wasp parasitoids, adults use their long ovipositor to deposit eggs inside of the host body, which is another insect, where the larvae slowly develop. And then after they hatch, they consume their hosts from the inside out. And again, they have also been recognized parasitoids for a long time, since the 1700s, as a form of agricultural biocontrol, and they are not studied enough. And then finally, we have the detritivores. These invertebrates are not technically insects for the most part, but they are insect adjacent as their fellow arthropods, and they are vital parts to every environment. The term detritivore and decomposer are often used interchangeably, but they describe different organisms. Detritivores are usually arthropods, with meaning they have no backbones, and they help in the process of remineralization, or the cycling of nutrients from organic matter back into the soil. Detritivores perform the first stage of remineralization by fragmenting the dead plant matter, allowing decomposers to perform the second stage of the remineralization. However, detritivores are responsible for up to 80% of the total decay rate in natural settings. They can be classified into more specific groups based on their size and biomes. Macros are larger organisms like millipedes, springtails, isopods, and micro detritivores are smaller, mostly bacteria. The ecosystem service these invertebrates provide through the cycling of nutrients is extraordinarily important in all ecosystems. Your yard is no different. The viability of every ecosystem is based on the normal functioning of its nutrient cycle. It's a super complex ecological process with a great number of components, and the activity of the detritivores benefiting the humus formation in the soil makes more nutrients available for plants. Insects and invertebrates included in this group are isopods, millipedes, carrion beetles, springtails, mites, snails, and slugs.
All right, next we are going to talk about some insects, some beneficial insects that you can see right here in the Clackamas Basin. All right, so first up, some pollinators of the Clackamas Basin. We've got our andrena and sweat bees. Andrenas are some of the first bees to emerge in the spring. Members of the genus Andrena vary greatly in size and appearance. Females can be recognized by patches of velvety hairs between their eyes, and over 100 species are found in Oregon. Andrenas are a type of mining bee, and they're super common in the Willamette Valley. They are sometimes mistaken for honeybees, but unlike honeybees, they are native to this region and are solitary cavity nesters. Sweat bees are some of the most common bees in Oregon. They are broad generalists, visiting many different plant groups. Members of the genus Halictus are medium-sized bees that vary from black to dark brown. Halictus are partially social and nest in tunnels in the ground. And this guy here is the common gray moth. It is associated with multiple types of native flowering plants, including goldenrod and saxifrages. They initially live in a capsule of their host plant, feeding on the seeds, and older larvae create a shelter on leaves on their host and complete feeding from within. And pupation takes place inside this shelter.
Okay, and still in pollinators, we have hoverflies. They're also called flower flies or syrphid flies, and these guys serve multiple functions throughout their life cycle. As larvae, the syrphid flies eat aphids, thrips, immature leafhoppers, and other small, soft-bodied plant pests. And a single larva of some species can eat dozens of aphids a day, and in other species, they can eat up like between 100 and 400 aphids a day. And then when they're adults, syrphid flies are very efficient pollinators of many native plants. They are also known to lay their eggs on plants near aphid colonies, which, is obviously going to help control that population. Another fun thing is that they are bee mimics, and they obviously have the same patterning. However, you can distinguish them by the number of wings. So flies will always have one pair of wings, so 2 wings total, and bees will always have 2 pairs of wings, 4 wings total. And still in pollinators, this is the longhorn beetle, also known as the round-headed beetle, and it's a common pollinator all throughout the Pacific Northwest. They're found readily in forested and landscaped areas throughout the summer, and they're super common here. Both of these pictures and specimens are from Clackamas County. This longhorn on a trillium was in Estacada, and this is just from somewhere in the county. So this is what they will look like here. And then moving on to predators. So earwigs, they are commonly treated as pests. I know some people, they're not everyone's favorite, but they're actually great to have in your yard. They are omnivorous, so they eat other bugs and also decomposing plant matter. They are predators, obviously, to other insects, and including the eggs and larvae of other insects, and they will feed on mites, aphids, slugs, nematodes, spiders, and a bunch of other soft-bodied things. None are native to Oregon. This is a European earwig, and most of the earwigs you're going to see are a European earwig. They are not considered invasive though, and have been naturalized and are doing great work here for us. And then on the right, we have the devil's coach horse, and that in that picture, it's in its defense posture. This is a voracious predatory beetle. The larvae feed on other soil-dwelling invertebrates. These you will find deep buried in some maybe 6 inches down of soil-ish. And so they'll eat things like fine weevil larvae and cutworms, and then the adults eat flies that are attracted to decomposing animal matter, and they will tear open the pupal cases of the flies and just kind of completely destroy whole populations of fly larvae. And then still on predators, we have snake flies. And so the snake flies are on our left. They're an awesome Oregon native, and they're not found really east of the Idaho border. They're not found too far south. They're really specific to Oregon. And their larvae feed on wood-boring insects and lots of other small soft-bodied things like aphids. And in both stages, so their larvae will eat just about everything, as will the adults. And the adults are often found in tree canopies, but look for them this summer. They come down. And then centipedes. Centipedes are awesome, and just like the other predators, they help control the populations of less desirable ones like aphids. They're found in damp, dark places, under stones or under leaf mulch or logs, and they come out at night to search for their prey. They will paralyze their insect prey with venomous claws. So each one of their little claws has its own venom gland. We have several species here in the basin, but if you're, gardening and you're in your yard and you're kind of digging up stuff, you're most likely to see a soil centipede, and that's the one here. And they're mostly reddish brown, and they're super, super, super skinny and small, and they're flatter than most other centipedes. They also don't have eyes. I don't expect anyone to get that close to see their eyes, but they do not have them because they spend their time underground. And then the awesome parasitoids of Clackamas. So again, as I mentioned, they're understudied and they're very hard to see because they are so small. So that makes ID and kind of understanding what you're seeing when you're trying to look for parasitoids kind of hard. We just have to trust that they're there. And so these are the ones that we can really expect to be in our yards here. Many species of ichneumon wasp. I think in my yard alone last summer, I counted like 10. And so, but they will all have that same general body style of a super, super cinched waist, very long antenna. And the females, this is a male here, but the females will have a super long ovipositor, which looks like their stinger. You might notice them this summer. They do come out as soon as the sun does. And then tachnid flies, which I think are awesome. They are a parasitoid fly, and they parasitize the larvae mostly of Lepidoptera, so moths and butterflies, or sawflies or beetles. The female will lay her eggs directly on the body of the host, and then upon hatching, the larvae burrow into the host and just go ahead and eat their internal organs. The insect pretty much always dies. And then, so to ID a tachnid fly, they're about the size of a housefly, but they're hairier. And again, they're kind of small, they're hard to see. You just kind of have to trust they're there. And something that you can do specifically to attract tachinids is they really like things in the dill family. This is just a cool one. And it just kind of highlights how little we know about these parasitoid relationships. This is Astata unicolor, and it's a tiny native wasp that preys on the invasive brown marmorated stink bugs. And we just learned about this relationship in 2018. So everybody go study parasitoids. Okay, and then our detritivores of Clackamas. We have a couple of different kinds of millipedes. However, again, if you're digging in the dirt and you're in your garden, you will most likely see one of the native black rounded millipedes. And they are really, really contributing to soil health. And then another common detritivore in our area are isopods. And we most commonly see the common shiny woodlouse, and feeds on dead plants and animals and wood. This is also a non-native organism. It is introduced from Europe, but it is not considered invasive and is considered naturalized and is doing good work. These are some of my favorites. So these are burying beetles, still in detritivores, and they are a type of carrion beetle, carrion being an organism that eats dead and decomposing flesh. The carrion means, yeah, a dead animal. And they're beneficial in a bunch of different ways, but helping break down all those nutrients back into the soil is the main thing. So this is what they look like. They're pretty, you can't really miss them. You've seen them, they're bright orange, and pairs will bond and mate for life. And their behavior is that they sense the decomposing animal by these sensors at the top of their antenna. And they go and they take a little bit of the dead thing and they bury it, hence their name. And then on top of the dead stuff material, they lay their eggs. And so that promises a first meal for their brood. And then they will continue just doing that for a couple of years. They live for a while.
All right, everyone. Next, we're going to talk about some methods to attract beneficial insects. So the first thing to do is to provide insects with food. So adult pollinators need nectar and pollen from flowers, and their larvae need leaves to eat. Some pollinators rely on specific host plants, like monarchs, butterflies on milkweed, or the Fender's blue butterfly on the Kincaid lupin. And other pollinators can use a variety of hosts. Oregon native plants and insects have co-evolved with one another. And 90% of insects are specialists, and so they rely on those native plants for survival. And in turn, some of those native plants rely on native insects as well. So we recommend incorporating as many native plants into your yard as you can to feed the bugs. However, if you want to do that, it's best not to eliminate all non-native plants during that process, because they could be providing food sources while new plantings of natives get established and begin flowering. So it can be best to phase non-natives out over time and provide a continuous food source. So a diverse mix of native flowering plants consisting of trees, shrubs, herbaceous flowering plants, and bunch grasses can supply a diversity of food choices for bugs. And you can clump plants of one species in a 3-foot wide patch along a connected strip or hedgerow, so insects can easily find the nectar and pollen. So you can also strategically place windbreaks for cover, and oftentimes pollinators require sun and a water source to thrive, so just keep that in mind as well as you're planting these garden features. And it's ideal to provide at least 3 different species of native flowering plants and 1 species of native bunch grass for all seasons from very early spring throughout the fall. Okay, so next we'll talk a little bit more about food. Many beneficials are attracted to daisy-shaped flowers like the Douglas aster on the left. These flower shapes not only provide pollen and nectar, but also a place for them to rest. And planting herbs and flowering perennials in and near your other garden plants will entice beneficials. Cover crops such as clover or yarrow are often used to protect and enrich areas in your garden that will remain unplanted for a period of time. Consider planting a cover crop in part of your garden and allowing it to flower. It's one of the best sources of nutrition for attracting beneficials when food is scarce. And using food resources is a great way to attract each type of beneficial insects. Next time you will want to think about, next you'll want to think about habitat. The majority of bees in Oregon are solitary cavity nesters. To complete their life cycle, they need access to loamy soil or small cavity areas like pithy stems of some woody perennial plants. To protect these burrowing bees, try and wait as long as you can in the spring to clean up your garden, like late April or even early May. This applies to many other species of beneficial insects, as most are also burrowers that require undisturbed space for their life cycle. There are also some human-made products like bee houses and hotels that have shown to attract large numbers of native bees. You can place these strategically around your yard in areas that will have the least amount of disturbance, as well as in areas that are partially sunny and partially shady. And if you want to get really wild, like Dakota, you can get several bee hotels and place them in different areas of your yard. She has one in full sun, one in the shade, one in partial of both sun and shade, and then several others tucked away throughout the yard in undisturbed spaces. A huge factor in habitat creation is actually just to do less. So over manicuring and kept yards are often too disturbed for insects to establish in. So for instance, leaf litter that falls in your yard over the fall and winter acts as insulation for a multitude of burrowing insects to overwinter and emerge in the spring. So if you rake them up or blow them, oftentimes you're raking up the larvae of beneficial insects as well. You can also leave some habitat in the form of spent perennials and other natural materials. So at the end of the season, you can leave the garden to overwinter, and bugs will make homes in those spent stems. And if having a messy yard just simply will not work for you, we understand. Consider a bug snug. So that's an organized collection of natural materials placed around your yard. There's one in the picture here in the middle of the screen, top middle. And this will help attract multiple types of beneficials. And then consistently mulching your garden and having stepping stones will provide moist environments for beneficial bugs to hide in. Bugs like it wet and messy. All right, now let's talk about water. Providing a steady supply of water, especially in the warmer months, will help attract a variety of insects. Ponds, bird baths, and sprinklers provide water to attract beneficials, but drip irrigation systems do not really offer an adequate water supply for them. Filling a shallow dish with rocks and water will accommodate all types of insects, giving them a place to drink without drowning. Of course, one thing to keep in mind is that standing water can attract mosquitoes. So turning over standing water every few days will help keep those mosquito larvae from developing.
Okay, and then so there's just the main things to avoid when trying to attract insects. There are three main things if you're trying to attract bugs to your yard that you should avoid. So as Amy said, avoid over manicuring. Just do less. The bugs like it messy. So you actually want to try to avoid releasing beneficials bought from garden stores. While buying and releasing beneficials, which are oftentimes exotic species, can help control large populations of garden pests. A more ecologically sound approach in the home garden is to attract and encourage existing populations of native insects and beneficials. Releasing non-native species can actually have the reverse effect in attracting native beneficials and can negatively impact the native populations. And then finally, we want to avoid pesticides. The most important thing that you can do to protect and encourage insect helpers in your garden and landscape is to avoid pesticide chemicals. Many beneficials are more sensitive to insecticides than the pests you are trying to control, and nearly all commercial insecticides are not target specific. That means that they will kill anything indiscriminately, and no discrimination. Our recommendation is that you look into a home garden IPM plan, which incorporates multiple methods of pest control as well as a mindset shift. There is a level of perceived pests that you may need to learn to live with, and to avoid chemicals does require some manual commitment and is often more labor. However, if you are committed to providing the best habitats for insects, this is the route to go. And then, oh, and this is yet just some final thoughts. Our watershed, like many others, is rapidly changing due to human caused changes and development, with many streams and natural areas being heavily impacted by these changes, much of which being neighborhood development with yards. By stewarding your own space and helping spread the word to others about beneficial insects, you can help mitigate these environmental changes on a community level. So here are some final thoughts and a couple ways for you to help. Please always reach out with questions. Remember, most bugs are good. Attracting them is a holistic and layered process. Go ahead and avoid over manicuring in your yard, just do less. Avoid purchasing beneficials from stores. Avoid pesticides as much as possible. And then if you're looking for a way to ID insects quickly in your garden, I recommend 2 apps. The first one I recommend is called Picture Insect, and the next one is iNaturalist. I do both. Finally, if you are a Clackamas Basin resident, please also consider taking the pesticide pledge. You will get an awesome yard sign, and it'll show your friends and neighbors your commitment to keeping our environment nice and clean. And with that, I will open it up for some questions.